You're listening to the AI Moment with me, Jonathan Wagstaffe.
And me, Danny Denhard.
And today we're going to talk about one of the things that quite often happens when Dan and I do workshops or presentations is we speak to people and they say, oh, well, I tried this and I didn't really get very good results, wasn't that impressed. And one of two things is quite often happening. One of my questions straight back to them usually is, well, we're using a paid version or a free version. And our advice, I think, would always be to use the paid version of whichever tool you like, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, whichever one's your favorite, because for £20 a month, it's extraordinary value and gives you an extraordinary better result. But the other thing that we quite often find is that, that there's been a very generic request. So somebody says to the AI, write me a marketing plan. And of course, you get a very generic answer back if you ask a very generic question. So one of the ways that we get around this without having to retype lots of detail every time is to create a thing called a company context document and use that to help educate the AI about who we are and give it some background and context to whatever else we might be asking it to do. So Dan, talk to us about a company context document, please.
You nailed it, Jonathan. To sort of expand just slightly on it, I've sat with companies and everyone in the team has to re-prompt and they keep having to give it information and context and more context. And so many people keep telling the LLM, so Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, about them, their company, and the important information. And it's kind of silly because it doesn't remember that. And it's something that they're working on. But as we know, it's going to be really difficult. So one of the recommendations I have is this living, breathing document that goes across the teams and not individuals. And it goes across the business, essentially, not just teams. And it's one doc for everyone to use and upload to LLMs. So within that document, I recommend, and this is in one of the upcoming AI workshops that Jonathan and I are co-hosting together, is to upload your ICP, so your ideal customer profiles. So that very much typically comes from your marketing team. Then any style guides you might have. This doesn't have to be really long, but all this context is vitally important. How your product shows up. So what your brand does, the place in the market that you might have. So are you high end? Are you luxury? Are you actually a discount or brand that thrives in the lower end? And where do we operate? So do we operate at the good, better or best model? Do you offer the services in the best ways? And can you package it all together to come together and for LLMs to really understand you, the context of your business and what you're offering? And this has to have a clear owner or a GOA that owns this and keeps updating it. So something that Jonathan and I were talking around before, and we'll dive into it just slightly now, is a lot of the time your ICP, so your ideal customer profile, won't really change. But sometimes your product does, or the types of people you're targeting certain features at. So that they're really core bits of information you should include in this context document. And then once it's updated, the owners ping out a message and then people then use that as a reference point. So say, for instance, you're releasing a new product feature to your audience. What is it? Why is it different? Who that target audience is? Obviously, there's going to be tremendous amounts of SKUs in some businesses. But if you have very specific product features that come out, the more information, the more context you can give, the more tailored, the better the answers and the outputs will be. And what that enables you to do from a marketing or a product perspective or a sales perspective is get so specific that actually the output gets much, much higher and you get a really high quality output. So that's the level of detail I would go in. It doesn't have to be, 50 pages. That ideally the shorter it is, the more condensed you can be, the more articulate you can be, the better the output. But like any human, like if you're onboarding a new team member, they need all of that context, all of that information and experience to go out and do the best job. So that's how I'm framing it and what I'm strongly recommending to every business I'm interacting with at the moment.
And I really like that. It was almost like a bullet list in there, Dan, when you said, that document should contain the ICP or the persona. It should be your kind of style and tone of voice. It should be your product set. It should be your market positioning. There's sort of 4 or 5 bullets there, which is a great example of how that document gets developed. And I think you also touched on something that's really important, which is the job here is not to create some giant masterpiece that lives in a vault somewhere. It's that really we should be assigning 1 or 2 people to own it, maintain it, and improve it, and constantly update it. And a simple document that's current of a few pages is far more valuable than in a huge, enormous tome that is 6 months out of date. So strike the balance between saying what you've got to say to just give somebody a summary of your business that's consistent versus being able to constantly update this thing and have it move with you. Why would you do this? Well, it's 2 things I think you're doing here. One is it saves you typing all that stuff in every time you want a prompt. It saves you having to retype in about the business and all that stuff. But it also gives you a consistent platform, because I think if you went out today in lots of businesses and got a marketer and a salesperson and the founder to describe the business, they would give you subtly or even wildly different descriptions, and the AI will amplify that. But if you've got a base document that everyone agrees that's a picture of what we are, then you can use that, and then you can talk about your particular use case or your particular detail of what you're trying to do, but it's coming off a common base, so you should get a family of answers that are kind of consistent with each other. And so then AI becomes more like your operational infrastructure rather than a tool you can use on a case-by-case basis.
What AI is doing in most businesses is shining a light on their operational efficiencies. And what it's really doing is saying, if you can't give us the context, you're probably not giving the customer or your ideal customers the right context for them to make great decisions. And I make this clear in the more recent workshops is, if you're not really, really clear on what you want to achieve, what it looks like, how you've got there to basically build a workflow, how you're ever going to expect technology to replace that or enhance it or optimize it, you're kind of hoping that something's going to become far more operational than you can be. And yes, some people do go to the lengths of giving AI they run on a 3% margin, etc. Their EBITDA is X, Y, Z. But if you can't give it and you don't understand operationally how it works and the steps you should take, AIs can only go so far. And as we keep saying, it's an assistant and a co-pilot. So if you can't give it that information, you can't load it and treat it, give it all the information it needs to be successful. Like a new team member or a new exec in your business, they're not going to be successful. So it is going to shine a light on how you work together, how you work cross-functionally, and how you agree on what the most important things are for your business.
Well, I think the TLDR there, Dan, is, as we said, we recommend people create a company context document. Doesn't have to be anything clever. It can be a PDF of a few pages. And as you alluded to earlier, customer type, stroke persona, stroke ICP. What's your style and tone of voice? Tells a little bit about your products, tells a bit about your market positioning, maybe 1 or 2 examples. And that's it, right? You probably, with those few headings, you can produce something which is a first pass. And then people might decide to put other pieces in there as they go forward that are relevant to their situation. But we would highly recommend that's where you start and have that as a document as the basis for a lot of your AI work this year.
Exactly right. And that's what we're telling every one of our customers. So if we're telling our customers that, then you're getting this great free resource to go away and make AI better for you.
How about that? Good to see you, my friend, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening today, everyone. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and review in any of the podcast players. We have a supporting newsletter, which is aiandmoment.co.uk, that comes out on Mondays and Fridays with every pod, and we dive a little bit deeper. So please subscribe there. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.